Hi everybody, Savannah Jackson here. Welcome to the Stavely Minerals update for the 3rd of April 2021. In this presentation, you're hearing general advice only. We haven't taken into consideration your personal financial objectives or needs. Trading involves risk. Past returns do not mean we'll make the same in the future. Spectrum Line Proprietary Limited is an authorized representative of the Gleneagle Securities Group, which holds an Australian financial services license. Okay, so in this presentation, I, of course, am Savannah Jackson. We're going to be talking to Chris Cairns. So let's now start the Zoom meeting with Chris. Okay, Chris, great to have you with us again today. Obviously, a big announcement just came out a couple of days ago, so I'll pass it over to you to give us, in your words, the latest.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Savannah. Yeah, the announcement during the week really was in two parts, I suppose. The first part was just continuing drilling up in the northwest extension. We keep getting these large, low-grade intercepts, and hole 134, for example, even though there was 4 meters of core loss on the basal contact of the Cayley lode, which typically is the best grade, and so a bit frustrating. We re-drilled that hole by moving the rig 10 meters to the northwest and re-drilled it as hole 140. And that collected all of the core. So we're interested in seeing that result. But these large low-grade intercepts are now recognized as part of a hydrothermal breccia. And the Cayley lode appears to have come up on the margins of some of this hydrothermal breccia we call the alpha breccia, as in Alfa Romeo. And it's the recognition of this breccia is, I suppose, the second part of the announcement, and that is the genetic implications of this breccia relative to the porphyry that we've been looking for, and we've been often saying is driving this system. So the intercepts that we've seen in some of the other holes, 121, for example, they're 70 odd meters at 0.6% copper and 0.7 grams gold, or the other way around. Those are pretty neat sort of porphyry-like grades, but it's because it's associated with this mineralized breccia. So the breccia itself contains mineralized clast of the porphyry that we've been seeking. The matrix, or when these breccias are formed, you end up with a matrix between the clasts made up of sort of rock flour and sulfides and magnetite in this case, and that's mineralized. And then we see cross-cutting veins coming across the breccia as well. So that's 3 phases of brecciation, or sorry, 3 phases of mineralization. So the Cayley lode continues up to the northwest. I think it's fair to say that it might be starting to break up a little bit as we go further and further northwest. But the occurrence of this breccia is really exciting to us, given that these breccias only form off the top of porphyry intrusions, or intrusions with a lot of volatiles. In this case, we know that it's mineralized because the clasts are mineralized, and they go vertically up. So notwithstanding there may be some structural offset, we really should be able to follow that breccia down. And yeah, this is the model that we've used. It's from Greg Corbett. He was on site with us. We were able to travel for the first time in a year in mid-March, and Greg came to site with us. He's coming back to site with me on the 11th of April. But these breccias are really important in terms of the source of the metals and also all the volatiles. So we're going to be looking at mapping out the distribution. In this figure of Greg's, he shows the different sort of shatter breccias and decompression breccias, etc. And you can map out looking at the different clasts and how round they are, where you are relative to the causative intrusion. So that's our next task, is to try and map out where that porphyry is spatially, and we'll be drilling a few holes to get at that. There is a couple of existing drill holes that we terminated, say at around 800 meters, that if we re-entered those holes, we could push it into this area and grab a bit more information. So that saves us a few bucks, if you will. So, you know, if we extend from 800 odd meters down to 1300 meters in an existing drill hole, we only actually end up drilling another 500 meters rather than the full 1300. So we've got a few options in that sense to gather some more information, but on a relatively cheap basis. So that's really what we're looking at doing now. I think otherwise, I've seen some chatter around our access to the southern paddock underneath the south of the railway. If I can share a screen with you, I'm going to have to be allowed to.
Is it allowing you to share the screen? New share. Hold on. I'll stop sharing and then you can share.
Yep.
All right. You've clicked share screen?
Yeah, it says host has disabled me.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, how do we? These are all my screens. Huh. Can't seem to see where it's not allowing you to. Oh, hold on a second. Multiple persons. Okay, try that.
Yep, got it. Okay. So this is just an expanded view of our normal drill collar location map. And, you know, the recent drilling has been up here in the northwest. Hole 134 is in here somewhere. This is the railway cutting across, goes to Portland. If you go off to the bottom left, about 100 kilometers away. And it's this triangular paddock here that just south of the railway. And the dashed line is the structure that we're targeting, the ultramafic contact fault, and the Cayley load sits on that. So we've set down here south of the fence line, drilled hole 85 into this position. And that's where we've intercepted the Cayley load at about 350 meters drill depth. So we're really confident that the Cayley load's in here. Sorry, that intercept in hole 85 was 23 meters at, I think, 1.1% copper and about 0.1 gold. So we're very confident it's coming through here. It probably represents another 200 to 300 meters of strike extent for us, which will take us, you know, in excess of a kilometer of strike extent. So we're quite keen to get on that bit of ground. We remain engaged in negotiation with the landowners to get access there. I mentioned in the recent announcement, if we don't get access within the next couple of weeks, then we're unable to work on that ground during winter because it gets very, very boggy. It's a low area. And the access would probably be sometime in late September, early October, if we reach agreement, you know, within the next couple of weeks, but not able to get on that ground, which I think the implication is pretty clear in terms of timing of the resource. We want to have that portion of the shallow mineralization included in the resource. So I think the implications are pretty clear. Having said that, we do run interim resource estimates. So we've just completed our second resource estimate for the drilling that we have done. I can't say anything in terms of grade or tons, but realistically, it's tracking as we expected. The tons and grade are within our expectations, and so that's good. And the drill density is appropriate for having ultimately a higher level of confidence in the resources classification. So, I mean, indicated resources as opposed to inferred. which is important, as I've sort of pointed out in various slides in presentations. When we go into a scoping study, you need that greater proportion of higher confidence resources for ASIC to consider that you've got what they call reasonable basis for putting out production targets and financials associated. So it is, the resource itself is tracking very nicely. I think it's worth noting that we are starting to pick up a few hints of mineralization inboard. So on this copper lode splay and in the collars of some of the drill holes as the collars step back, starting to pick up some stuff in that. It's all sort of coming together nicely with respect to how we envisage it developing as a project. We're moving into scoping study after the resource. We're putting people in place and interviewing project managers, all of that sort of thing, study managers for those economic studies. And it's worth noting that an open pit that pulls down on the higher grade structurally controlled mineralization is likely also to capture a large proportion of the chalcocite blanket mineralization. So there'll be a little bit of management in terms of low grade and high grade stockpiles. In reality, you would put as much of the high grade through a process plant as you could in the early stages while you're paying back all your loans. But the low grade would be stockpiled and then likely blended with material as you go underground and your hard rock production rate reduces. You top up the process plant with that, what's probably going to be a very large stockpile of low grade mineralization from the chalcocite blanket. So now the project's looking good. We've got some good exploration targets regionally. We're doing some soil sampling over some areas that we quite like and some regional air core drilling to get through some of the cover. And of course, we've got that large gravity gradiometer survey that probably will complete on Easter Monday. So I think data from that might be available by the end of the month after processing. And yeah, we very eagerly await that information. So now it's all tracking nicely. We just got to continue engaging with the landowner to get access to that southern paddock, and otherwise everything's on track. At the end of March, we would have had in excess of $20 million in the bank. So we've got lots, we're well funded. We'll complete this resource drill out. We'll complete the scoping study. And so everybody will have a very clear picture of what the company's asset is before we have to come to the market. So that's a bit of the high level overview.
Okay, excellent. As you know, of course, it's been a while since we did an interview. Back in November was the last one. And since then, there's been a lot of questions and a lot of things happening. So I've got a number of questions from the Hot Copper team, plus my own questions. So just picking up on what you were just saying there, the southern paddock. Can you go a bit further in explaining what the holdup has been? Why has it taken so long to negotiate? Is the farmer holding out? What are your recourse actions? I mean, can you go to court? What's that going to involve? What's the reality of getting access to that paddock?
Yeah, look, I think under the legislation, we have right of access. So if we can't agree terms, and I think the point in that respect is that we need to be shown to have provided a reasonable offer to the landowner, and we have.
Is this to buy
having
his
done
land,
that,
or is this just to gain access to the land?
Yeah, that's right.
What, gain access or to buy it?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is leasing the property for a period of time,
right,
that allows us to complete the program we need to complete. We're well advanced in those discussions. The alternative, if we were not able to reach agreement, is that we go through a process going to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, VCAT. And after having tried to gain access and given them a reasonable offer, and that's refused, we can then seek VCAT to enforce our right of access. That is a process that involves lawyers. It's effectively a quasi court, and really, to my mind, yes, we have that as the final option, but I don't think that we will need to go there. I think that we can sort this out with a reasonable agreement and get access to that ground. I think the issue is really only around timing.
Right. Is the owner holding out because he's waiting for you to, announce a porphyry discovery, or trying to negotiate?
No, I don't think they have any, objectives or strategies around that. I think it's just one of those things where they'd rather that we weren't there, or rather that the deposit wasn't there, and that they could just keep on grazing sheep, and that they weren't hassled by this not so big mining exploration company wanting to get access to their land. It's just one of those things that they'd rather not be bothered.
So I can't believe we're being held up by some guy who doesn't even know what's going on. He can't just be bothered. It's crazy. All right. How frustrating for you, I'm sure.
We did release, it's on our website, a Deloitte Access Economics report on the economic impact study for what we think this project could become. And there are a lot of caveats in that report to say that we've got a lot of work to do, and as we drill this thing out, it's got to behave itself. But if it does eventuate as we imagine that it will, then there's going to be somewhere between 500 and 800 direct and indirect jobs associated with the project. Over a 25-year period, a contribution of between 1.4 and 2.3 billion dollars to the local economy. And we had that document produced primarily for our community-facing discussions with local government, just to give them an idea of what this project could mean for the local community, and also to an extent sort of saying to the community, well, look, we know it's a pain in the ass having us around. We know that you rather we weren't there, but the reality is that if this thing does pan out, then it's a really significant opportunity for employment for the local community and a contribution to the local economy. So, let us please get on with our work, and this is what it could be.
Wow. And what happens then with the scoping study? If you can't get access to the southern paddock until September, October, is that going to do, because you've talked about getting this study out by Q1 initially, and then Q2 because of delays with the assays, etc. Are we now looking at Q4 or even next year before the study is finished?
Yeah, look, I think that's also the implication of timing around access, is that we do need to drill those holes. We need to get the assays back. Then we need to incorporate those assays in a resource estimate, and then the scoping study really comes off that resource estimate, in that the next stage is to do an open pit optimization, look at cutoff grades, look at then that gives us an idea of mining rates, how much material is going to be produced by the open pit over a set period of time, and then what is an appropriate scale for the process plant, and then obviously the scale and size of the process plant and its configuration leads into an estimate of how much to build one of those of that scale, how much it's going to cost, and that's where your capital numbers come from. So yes, one leads to the other, and if one is delayed, then the other is necessarily delayed as well. So it's certainly a knock-on effect. In the interim, all we can do is try and secure access to that as quickly as we can, and yeah, then we can get on with it.
So obviously, I mean, just to put to rest people's concerns, you're doing everything you can do to get up
Absolutely,
that
absolutely. We've been
paddock.
Yeah, we've been fully engaged for some time. We're paying for the farmers' lawyers. We're doing a bunch of things that really you wouldn't otherwise be doing to make sure that we get access to this paddock.
Good grief. Okay. Yeah, obviously incredibly frustrating for everybody involved, I'm sure.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. We'll leave that one. Coming back to the porphyry, I mean, what you just talked about, breccia and everything. Obviously, just in maybe in more layman terms, for those of us who aren't used to studying Greg Corbett's thesis.
Yeah.
Obviously, the 2 drill holes that you just recently did not hit the porphyry. However, you found a vector towards what you believe is the porphyry. So how confident are you now that the porphyry is there? And how confident are you that you're going to be able to find it on the next drill holes?
Yeah, look, with respect to the 2 deep holes, they were finished as expected in February. One of them was...
Oh, great.
We think that we understand...
You broke up there. Can you just repeat whatever you just said? You froze on the screen.
Sorry. So the 2 deep porphyry holes that we drilled were completed as we expected in February. One went to 1850 meters and the other to 1650, or around about that. We think that we can explain the seismic reflectances that we saw in the seismic survey that those 2 drill holes were testing. We think that they're explained by geology as opposed to mineralization. Both of the drill holes intercepted some interesting zones of mineralization, both from about 600 meters down to about 1,000 meters depth. So about a 400 meter interval in both of them. But it wasn't, we would have gone into trading halt had we hit obvious porphyry style mineralization. So the lack of a trading halt is clearly showing that we didn't hit that style of mineralization. What we did hit is what we think are, we do see the normal D veins that are probably late, what we consider late porphyry. And some of them are mineralized, but we also saw a set of veins that we consider to be what we say prograde, or as the porphyry system is commencing, the early mineralized veins we consider prograde, as opposed to retrograde, which D veins are. And so I wanted Greg Corbett to come and have a look at those because we weren't entirely of ourselves confident in making a call as to what they meant relative to the porphyry system. We're waiting Greg's report, and I think the preliminary discussion is around them potentially being, whilst they are porphyry related, they may be a little bit more distal to the porphyry than we had hoped. To some degree, that recognition has been overtaken really by the recognition of the breccias and the breccias containing mineralized porphyry fragments. So that's a far more direct and emphatic indication to us as to where the porphyry is. And so, the 2 deep porphyry holes drilled on seismic data were not successful. I think that the seismic reflections really are, it's not really sensitive information. Those reflections are probably related to a thick andesite pile, which is seafloor lavas that we see in those holes beneath the interesting zone. And so that's, as I say, explained by geology. But porphyry-wise, we think that we've now got a direct vector to where the porphyry is through these mineralized breccias. So that's, swings and roundabouts. But, we've often said that, that we think that there's a porphyry driving this system. If it is down there and if it is well mineralized, then it's a game changer for us in the context that, if we can demonstrate the porphyry, then we're talking about people who may be interested in this asset as, the tier 1 mining groups, as opposed to, if we're talking about something that's just structurally controlled high grade copper, gold, silver, then we're more attractive to the intermediates. So it's a change of the league in which we're playing, if you will, to coin a sporting phrase, that the porphyry discovery really, I think, in terms of value add, is the opportunity to really make a big difference for shareholders. And so that's why we've, sort of thrown the kitchen sink pretty much at trying to find the damn thing. The seismic didn't work, but it was still worth doing. And now, just because we've been continuing to drill and continuing to assess the geology, we've now got a geologic vector to the porphyry. So I think if we can tag it and it's well mineralized, then we're playing in a different league. And I think that's a really important thing for shareholders.
Right. So what's the plan going forward? You talked about going down 2 existing holes and extending them in the search. And when will that be done?
Yeah, at the moment, we are considering extending one of the existing holes, hole 47. I believe it was completed at 842 meters, and we'll extend that down to 1,300 meters, and it should go underneath that body of porphyry sitting next to the Cayley load. So I'll just share another image. Really, it's that same announcement. And when you look at when you look at the Cayley load is in red here. The breccia is in through here, and this is a number of the recent holes that we provided sections for in the announcement. Hole 47 will be coming down into this part of the world,
The extended
underneath that body of breccia.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's definitively going to hit the porphyry, but I'm saying is we have no drilling in this part of the world. And so we need to get some information and some sense of vector to that. And so this is the cheapest and easiest way to do that straight away. As I say, Greg Corbett's coming to site with me week after next, or actually in 8 days. And we'll continue to go through various drill holes and map out where the fragments are, where we think it's sourced from. And if we have to, we'll drill new holes into this area to try and pick up that porphyry.
Okay, so you're not expecting necessarily to hit the porphyry with the extension hole of 47. You're just trying to get more information of what's down there.
Yeah, look, I think that's the thing, is that this sort of exploration, looking for a blind target, is really incremental. You're hunting something. We have to stalk it, and as we get closer to it, each bit of information will give us a vector towards it. And so I think there is no alternative but to use the drill bit once you get a sniff, and this is the best indication we've had yet. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think Greg was very, very excited, more confident of a direct vector to the porphyry than he ever has been, was his comment to me. So it's a bit of an exciting period. But the crazy thing is, from our perspective, is if we hit this porphyry, then maybe all the drilling that we've been doing over the past year is for naught, because the porphyry is such a far bigger story than the Cayley load would be. So anyways, nice problem to have.
Right. Well, let's hope that we're dealing with that problem down the track. Okay, so what sort of time period do you think you'll have before you finish the extension of hole 47?
Look, the hole that, we've got currently, as per the image, I took this photo while we're on site, 5 rigs in a line. One of these rigs is a large capacity rig. So it will go on to, it was one of the rigs that drilled the deep porphyry holes. It will go on to that once it completes its current hole, which I think will be in the next couple of days. It's a little bit of a tricky exercise sometimes trying to get down some of these older holes. You have to re-enter, but they'll set up on it and have a crack at getting down that thing. We've done it before successfully, but it's always a bit of a risky venture. Once we get down that hole, you're really looking at maybe 2 weeks to drill the extension. So it's a pretty quick process.
Okay, so within the next month, you should have it probably drilled out, you reckon?
Yep, that's right.
Right, and then, okay, so that brings the question of assays. Obviously, are you still experiencing the big, long delays getting the results back from the lab?
Yeah, we seem to be flatlining really at the moment at around 10 holes in the lab and 10 holes backlog on site to be cut and sampled. We've increased our field crew. We've had a little bit of an equipment failure. One of the core saws, we have 2 automatic core saws. One's had to be packed up and sent back to Perth for rebuilding. So that's a little bit of a bottleneck for us. But we just have to wait for the assays to come through the lab. Our samples are prepped in Adelaide, and really a small packet of finely ground sample is then sent to Perth for analysis of base metals and precious metals. And so we're in the queue, if you will, with every other little gold junior in WA who's going hammers and tongs. In WA, you can't get a drill rig or a geologist for love or money. So it's really booming over here, but we're just in line. And that's just the way it is when the industry goes crazy like this.
Is there any way you can push yourself to the front of the queue? Have you pulled any
look,
strings or paid any money?
I feel sorry for the lab people because, some of these little juniors haven't had access to capital for a couple of years. And so when they get a bit of money, they run out and do a program. And then the MD, is on the phone to the lab every day, jumping up and down like a pork chop. So I feel sorry for the lab people because they'd be fielding calls all day, every day for people desperate to get their results, and we say to the lab, and our message is pretty clear, is that we were sending samples to them when during the downturn, we were there doing a lot of drilling and sending a good flow of samples constantly during the downturn, and they need to look after us because these other guys are fly-by-nighters, and some of them pretty flaky, and we've been there consistently over time, and they accept that, they appreciate it, they acknowledge that we've been long-term supporters of their business, if you will, but that's at the end of the day, we just have to accept that they are incredibly busy, and we've got to slot in. My real thing with the lab is I don't want us to be bumped because of the squeaky wheels in this world, but acknowledge that they are busy and that we kind of have to accept delays.
Are there alternative labs or mobile labs or anything you can use? You think
I suppose. Look, there's 2 elements to that question. All of the labs are busy. Everyone's busy. You can do mobile labs and that sort of thing, but the trouble is that affects your QA/QC. And if you were just doing regional reconnaissance exploration and you weren't using your results for a resource estimate, then yeah, fine. That sort of those quality issues you could probably accept. But when you're using your data for a resource estimate and those resources eventually will become a reserve, you have to make sure that you've got that quality element. Otherwise, you just won't get accreditation for the quality of the resource or the reserve.
Okay. I think that answered a number of questions that people were fielding on hot copper. That question in particular. Another question is, obviously you pointed it out. The aerial survey will be finished this coming Monday, you reckon? So they've completed
Yeah.
the whole 600 square meter.
Again, I don't think
kilometer.
it's sensitive in terms of market sensitivity, but I'll just share with you yesterday's flight report or production report, they call it. And so this is the survey area.
Wow.
The north-south lines are what they call tie lines, and we fly those so that we can level those east-west lines from one to the other, so that really they're a benchmark. So all the green lines are lines that have been flown. These gaps are where they haven't been flown. We have a sensitive area just on the edge there with the wildlife shelter. We've told them that we won't fly that until today, I believe it is. Look, the plane's not very loud. I was on site when it flew over us, and our place is just in here where the cursor is. And yeah, so we just don't want to disrupt the animals there. And that's fine. We've coordinated.
Obviously, because it's important that Easter, they have the Easter holiday. Is that what you mean, or?
Yeah, that's right. No, the lady who runs it said that she would be out there with a couple of volunteers on today, and that they would be able to look after the animals if there was any distress, which we don't expect. You might be able to see there's a couple of lines like this one that's shaded yellow. Yeah. That's a line where our client's representative has said that the data quality is not good enough and they need to refly it. So there's half a dozen of those sorts of lines up in this area. Otherwise, yeah, expect that over the Easter weekend, they'll be able to finish the survey, hopefully complete the flying on Monday. And then it's a bit of a wait for the data processing. But yeah, it's one of those data sets that it's going to stand us in good stead for the regional exploration for decades to come. And we're really, a lot of this area, particularly in this area around Wallora, down through to Lake Ballack, it's quite flat, and you can see the ephemeral lake systems through here. So there's a bit of cover through there, just shallow cover, and you don't see a lot of exposure in the rocks. And so data sets like this really help us focus in on some of the more prospective areas. As we've pointed out in our presentations, the clay alteration above the porphyries tends to give you a very distinct gravity low. So we're very hopeful that we'll pick up some interesting targets out of this survey.
Right, and that's a lot of, especially around the Wallora area where you were just pointing out, there hasn't been much exploratory drilling in that area before.
No, not at all. And if people recall our tenement map, our main tenement was along that sort of western edge of this area, and the bulk of the area to the east is what we won in a government tender.
Yeah, and that's EL 6870.
That's right, and we only applied for one bit of ground in that tender, and that was the one that we wanted. We received it. I think in the area, clearly we're the most active explorer in the area. So, and this gravity gradiometer survey is a bit of a commitment of $1.2 million towards a baseline data survey. We're probably in a unique position that we're well funded enough that we can do that scale of baseline data acquisition. But yeah, that area has not had much exploration at all. As I say, there's quite a bit of cover, well, quite a bit extensive cover. The cover itself is not that thick, but it means that, when you walk in the ground, you don't see much of the rocks.
Right. And so things like Thursday's Gossan, the shallow mineral resource that you're currently drilling out now, would that show up in these type of aerial surveys?
Yeah, look, I'll put my cursor would be, yeah, right about where Thursday's Gossan is. And certainly in the gravity data that we've collected to date, it shows up very clearly. So yeah, we certainly expect that it'll show up in this gradiometer survey.
And that section of land that you won from the government, EL 6870, is that now 100% owned, controlled by Stavely, or is that still a tender process you're going through?
No, it's owned by Stavely. Yeah, we've done an agreement with the native title claimants in the area. Might point out that that freehold land in Victoria extinguishes native title, so the native title only applies to Crown land. But that is a prerequisite for getting your tenement granted. So I believe it's on the minister's desk for signing.
So it hasn't been 100% signed over to Stavely just yet?
Not just yet.
And you're expecting that this year?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm just going through, I'm just trying to read through some of the questions. We've had so many, of course. We've covered most of these so far. So you've talked before about visuals, like you've said in previous interviews that you won't comment on visual results, only on results that come back from the labs. Are you still holding to that? I mean, obviously, apart from had you hit something with the porphyry, then you would have gone into a trading halt. But apart from that, are you still reluctant to talk about any visual results?
Look, I think I think what I wanted to get away from was effectively get off the hamster wheel of pre-releasing drill hole by drill hole as we were getting into the Cayley load. So I thought that once we established the discovery and started to flesh it out, that it wasn't worth us continuing to provide commentary on a drill hole by drill hole basis as we drilled that out. The deep porphyry holes, I believe they would have been a different thing entirely, in that the significance, had we seen porphyry style mineralization in those holes, would have meant that we would have been compelled, I think, to go into trading halt and then explain what it is that we were seeing. I think likewise, for example, if the extension of hole 47 gets into well-developed porphyry mineralization, the same applies. I think we would be compelled to go into trading halt and then prepare a release around what it is that we see with respect to that porphyry. But day-to-day Cayley load intercepts, that sort of stuff, no, we won't be providing pre-commentary on what we're seeing in the drill holes until we get the assays, but the porphyry is a different matter.
Okay. And beyond Thursday's Gossan, do you have a gut feeling as to where you think you may be looking next, or are you waiting for this aerial survey to come back? What's your views beyond Thursday's Gossan?
Yeah, look, we've been in the background, we've been doing quite a bit of work to help with our regional targeting. And that includes a couple of structural studies, one which was through the Stavely belt, so probably 50-kilometer extent north-south. And then a second stage of that same project was a structural reinterpretation of the Stavely area, like Thursday's Gossan. And that produced some very interesting outcomes, some of which were presented by Dr. Rob Home at the Fremantle Explorers Conference. It was a presentation. He works for a group called CSA Global. And so he did a presentation that we authorized at the Fremantle Explorers Conference, where he presented some of his results. That work has provided some regional targets. Currently, we are doing sort of auger soil sampling. It's just a tractor with a post hole digger going around and taking soil samples, as well as an air core drill rig up on the Toro Road type area up to the northwest. We're drilling around there. We got some. We also sent some samples off to University of Tasmania to do what they call green rock geochemistry. So they look at the alteration minerals chlorite and epidote, which they use laser ablation inductively coupled plasma analysis. So it's very high tech. Effectively what they do with a very high precision laser is they vaporize these green minerals, and then they analyze multi-element analysis of what they contained, and they can determine in the one instance whether you're in the vicinity of a fertile porphyry system, which for the samples up at Tura Road, they concluded that yes, we were in the vicinity. And with the chlorite samples, they can tell you how far you are away from it, which is a very interesting technology. So we had that done at Thursday's Gossan. Really, I think what that tells you in terms of vectoring is that it really is affected by the distribution of your samples. So we'll probably put those reports all up on our website. We've been pretty transparent with our data. So we'll get that up along with, I might add, Greg Corbett's latest report, which we're expecting in a little while. But yeah, just keep people informed. But that's a long way of saying, yes, we are interested in a couple of areas regionally for exploration. We're doing soils and air core around the place, looking at those targets. We like potentially a structural offset of the ultramafic up to the north, and we're investigating that. I had a bit of a look on the ground when I was out there and liked the look of some of the rocks, but we've got samples at the lab and we don't know what they're going to come back at.
Right. But that's quite close to Thursday's Gossan, a few hundred meters?
Yeah, that's, you're talking probably 3 kilometers.
Oh, 3 kilometers. Okay, right. Okay, finishing off some questions here. Yeah. Okay. I think we've kind of nailed everyone's questions. I know this one keeps coming up, and I'll ask it again anyway. Though you've mentioned it before, you still have no intention of going to production, do you? Like, you still plan on whatever you find with the scoping study, whatever you find with the porphyry hunt. You don't see the company itself going into production. Is that still the case?
No. Look, I think from our perspective, we need to progress this through to development. Whether another corporate decides that they want to own the asset and wants to make us an offer, I think we need to progress the project as if we were going to develop it ourselves. And it's entirely up to another corporate if they want to approach us. But we have to do all of our work to a standard where we would be happy to take it into production. So I think the best thing for us is to do that, just to progress it with quality work, and what will be corporately. With respect to and look, I'm less concerned about developing the Cayley Loud type scenario ourselves. I don't see it as being that much bigger than what we've already developed east of Kalgoorlie. Maybe a little bit more technically challenging than a gold process plant, in that those things are well understood, that they're almost like you buy them off the shelf type of thing. Whereas this is a little bit more intricate in terms of trying to float 3 different types of copper sulfides, chalcocite, chalcopyrite, and bornite. I haven't mentioned the met test work, but that is progressing very, very well. And we're expecting that we'll be complete that within about 6 weeks. And yeah, look, I think that's tracking very well. And some not surprising sort of preliminary results in that, the gold is reporting to the bornite concentrate and various other aspects that, you would expect. But then if we discover the porphyry, I've said a number of times, look, the people who mine these bulk underground deposits have got specialist engineering teams that's all that they do. It requires really deep pockets because you have to set up the deep underground infrastructure because you mine them from underneath. So you have to go a long way down, put all this infrastructure in before you get any revenue. We're talking billions and billions of dollars to set something like that up. And that sort of expertise and the deep pockets is probably not really suited to a smaller company like ourselves. And it's complicated. So no, I don't see us as the natural owner of the porphyry, should it eventuate. But as for the Cayley load and the combination of open pit and underground, I don't see that as overly complex and beyond our capability. But we do need to evolve the company in terms of its board. So we're likely to appoint another non-executive director who's got development experience, mining engineer, and appointing project managers and various people to evolve the executive skills that we have internally to be able to manage a development like that. So I think what people will see is as the project evolves through the economic studies and the well-worn path is scoping study, pre-feasibility, feasibility, then into financing, that the board and that the executive team will evolve likewise with appropriate skill sets to that evolution.
Okay, and so if you were to go down that road, you're looking at easily a few years, right, before there would be any major development in terms
Yeah,
of...
that's right. That's you're probably looking at for pre-feasibility and feasibility studies, 12 months for pre-fees, probably 18 months for feasibility, 6 months for financing, and then that's not even contemplating the whole sort of timeline around permitting and that sort of thing. So it's you've got to be in there for the long haul. I think that the one way that we can maintain investor interest as that process goes on is testing these regional targets and sort of making the pie bigger, and also continuing to go after that porphyry because the prize is well worth it. But once you get into the process, you have to follow it through, and it's just a sequential, systematic sort of a process to get towards financing and then project development, permitting.
Right. So to summarize that up, you are moving towards production yourself, unless you hit the porphyry, and then you'll likely have a big tier one player come in and take it over.
Look, I mean, my perspective on at what time a group comes in is dominated by the fact that I'm a shareholder too, and if you just not naming anyone in particular for any reason, but if we were to let PHP or Rio Tinto in on a joint venture basis, what tends to happen is that they just effectively spend you out of the water. If our shareholders are being diluted by the money that they spend, they can just spend money for years, and we end up as a minority shareholder in a project that, it's very hard to realize value that way. And examples would be Highland Pacific. They had 10% of the Goro nickel project in joint venture with the Chinese. They have 10% of Freda River porphyry copper gold project, both in New Guinea. The Freda River in joint venture with another Australian mining company. And they were a minority player. Their share price never reflected their equity holdings in either of those projects, and they had no say about how and when those projects were developed. And so for shareholders, you're trapped in a vehicle that has no control over its destiny, and you're not seeing value. An alternative in terms of the participation of majors might be Sol Gold in Ecuador. They've got a porphyry system over there. BHP and Newcrest both have equity positions, I think now around 13%. But you know, that's not been an easy relationship. And you know, and Nick Mather's the CEO there. He's been under pressure by his joint venture partners and various other things. And he's looked to do financings by, he sold a streaming deal to Franco-Nevada, which is a royalty company. Look, you know, you want those guys effectively, I think from Nick's perspective, and it would be my perspective as well, the best outcome is if one of those guys stepped up and made a bid for him, you know, and yeah, don't try to kill me by a death of 1,000 cuts financially. Just come on, step up to the plate and make an offer, and then we can have an adult conversation around that. And so that's my thinking. I don't like the joint venture route because I think we end up being diluted and locked out of our own asset, basically. I think you're better off for them to come in and put a bid on the table and say, right, let's have a discussion.
Okay. So that's where you think, well, we could end up being unless you take it to production.
Yeah, I think the other thing about a joint venture, and we're talking in the porphyry scenario here, is that, you know, you never see full value for your asset, and you know, it's if you go down the joint venture route, then effectively you're blocking out every other participant who might have made a bid for you, and so you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face.
Right. So in the case of finding the porphyry, you'll want to find somebody to buy us out. Or just not the whole company, buy out just this porphyry, correct?
Yeah, look, I think not dissimilar to the Cayley philosophy in that, yeah, we'll develop it unless somebody else steps up and decides they really want the asset. I think with the porphyry, I think that we are perfectly able to drill the thing out, just as Nick is doing at Sol Gold in Ecuador. They're drilling it out. They might be taking a little bit of advice from their substantial shareholders, Newcrest or BHP, around how they would want it drilled out. And I think we would be receptive to that sort of input. But I think that we're quite capable of drilling something out to the extent that we can determine what the asset's worth. And then again, we can have that sensible adult discussion around what would get us across the line in terms of a bid.
Okay. We got to find it first.
Got to find it first, and then happy to start drilling it out. And if somebody gets excited about it and offers us some money, then, you know, we'll look at it at the time. As I say, my perspective is entirely aligned with the rest of shareholders, and that is because I'm a shareholder, and I think, you know, that's where the greatest benefit is to all of us.
Yeah. Your from a capital raising point of view, you mentioned that we've got about $20 million in the bank as of end of March. Are you planning any more capital raising? Have you got funding for the rest of the year? What's your sort of take on that?
No, look, we have enough funding to get through the resource, you know, given that the resource drilling is almost complete now. So we're well funded through completing that resource drill out. We'll drill some deeper holes, and we'll get through the scoping study. And so, you know, the value of the asset will be transparent to everybody in the market once we get that scoping study out, and we don't need to raise money before that. Okay,
but we're looking potentially end of the year now, given the southern paddock access hassle.
Yeah, that's right. You know, as in on probabilities with regard to that access, I think that might be a fair view.
Right, right. Okay, I think we've nailed all the questions that everybody had, and some of my questions as well. Thank you once again for your time. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
No, maybe just the one thing. Again, as a shareholder, I'm sure that everybody else has seen the share price movements. It's particularly frustrating. We believe there was a big seller in the market. We've worked with brokers to bid that who we thought it was, and we've seen some parcels of shares crossed up, taken that selling out. Once that selling came off, we popped up to over 70 cents. And it's frustrating to see effectively what I think is best described as people playing your stock. And we look at the shorts. We do wonder about one group in particular that whose business strategy appears to be both an equity holder and a shorter of the stock, and a number of stocks. And we do question the ethics of that. And it really does affect the value of mom and dad shareholders, the value of their stock, and they don't understand what's going on. They're not privy to what's going on in the background, and that we're trying to work with brokers to relieve that selling so that the share price can reflect fair value. I think this aspect of the market is a little bit opaque, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Right. Okay. I guess we'll leave it at that. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Savannah. Have a great Easter.
Yeah, you too. And wishing everybody who's watching this video and all shareholders a wonderful Easter as well. We thank you for your time tonight. We hope you helped you, and may we wish you all profitable investing. Good night.